Hey everybody, how's it going? I just wanted to talk to you for a couple of minutes today about one of the sort of like major modes when it comes to writing literary analysis, the comparative essay. Uh, this is something that we see over and over again in literary analysis. There's actually an entire field called comparative literature. We tend to make sense of and analyze a lot of things when it comes to literature by comparison. Who did a better job of making use of or handling the form of the sonnet, for instance, Shakespeare or Edna St. Vincent Millay, or the list of possibilities goes on. So I just want to talk to you a little bit about what a good comparative thesis statement looks like, and two of the primary methods for organizing a comparative literary analysis. So just before we do that, though, I do want to mention the fact that comparison and contrast, compare contrast it's I don't know. There are always going to be elements of both comparison and contrast in a comparative essay. That's just the nature of things. Some things are both similar and different at the same time. That's pretty much the case for everything. Some comparative essays give more weight to similarities, but also remember that you're never going to be doing any kind of comparative analysis where there are no differences at all. So you do always, always, always remember that all comparison must also include some discussion of differences. So, as far as your thesis statement, what are some things to avoid? Well, saying something simply along the lines of like, these things are similar but also different. Yeah, of course. That statement, it's not really an arguable point. All things, especially if they're similar enough to be, the types of things that you're writing about or doing an essay about. Of course they're similar, and of course they're also different. It's very vague. It doesn't really address any kind of specifics. And so I think a good example of this, it's in chapter 6 of our book from from one of the sample essays. I think this does a pretty solid job of describing and showing you how we can see this comparative essay working. So let's read it together. In the birthmark, the main character, Aylmer, views his wife's birthmark as a flaw in her beauty, as well as a symbol of human imperfection, and tries to remove it. In The Thing in the Forest, the protagonists, Penny and Primrose, react to the thing both as a real thing and as a symbol. The character's interpretation of these things is what creates conflict, and the stories are both shaped by the symbolic meanings that the characters ascribe to those things. And so what that does is it sets us up to kind of understand, okay, both, like, we're going to look at both how the characters of Aylmer and the way that he looks at his wife's birthmark, and the characters of Penny and Primrose, and how they look at the thing as how these perceptions are creating conflict, and we're going to look at the similarities and differences between those two things. It sets us up to understand that we're going to talk about the birthmark first because that's what comes first in the thesis statement, and then we're going to talk about the thing in the forest. Also very much worth pointing out here, you can see that this thesis is a couple of sentences long. Your thesis can be more than one sentence. In fact, I think the more complex our thoughts get, the more complex our arguments get, the longer our thesis statements tend to be. You do want to try to, get everything out in just a couple of sentences. You don't want to have a thesis page or anything like that, but, a couple of sentences is totally fine. So there are two primary ways that you can go about organizing a comparative essay. We've got the block method and the point by point or side by side method. So block method, basically what it does is it breaks your essay into blocks or sections. You lay out your entire argument on one thing, and then you move on to do the same thing for the other thing that you're comparing. So for instance, in the previous example, we would have everything about the birthmark in one block, everything that we have to say about that. And then we move on to a second block where we're talking about everything about the thing in the forest. This is great for shorter assignments or for any essay where you want to emphasize differences just as much as you want to emphasize similarities. I say it works best for short assignments, mainly because it if you try to do this, and short assignments can be like 10 pages, 10, 20 pages. For something longer than that, like book length, it gets a little unwieldy. Also, mainly because we need to keep everything in mind that we talked about in block 1. We need to have that in the back of our minds when we're reading block 2. And so that's why it's if you're writing like a 4-page thing, block 1, it's pretty easy to keep everything that you talk about there in mind while you're doing block 2. Anyway, when you're doing this, it is important to make each block match the other. So what that means is all of the things and points that you make, all of the sort of targets that you approach in the first block, you have to do the same thing in the second block. So you have to be comparing and contrasting the same things for each person. So if you're talking about symbolism in your first block, like with the thinking about the birthmark as a symbol and then thinking about the thing as a symbol, like you have to talk about those in both things. And then next, you want to order and present the blocks so that they are building on each other. Like you don't want to just arbitrarily order your stuff together. Going back to this example of the birthmark and the thing in the forest, the symbolism in the birthmark is much more straightforward and it's easy to kind of grasp, whereas the symbolism with the thing in the forest it's a little bit vaguer, more complex. We need a little bit more time to kind of build up to get to that point. And so by starting with the more straightforward symbolism, it allows us to build the argument to get up that way. The point-by-point or side-by-side method is, again, I think it takes a lot more planning, perhaps, but it allows us to really kind of do a more one-to-one comparison in some ways. What it does is it integrates the discussion of the texts or the characters or whatever that you're comparing and puts them side by side. So you would have like sections of your essay. So for example, going back to that idea like of the birthmark and the thing in the forest, like you could do one section on symbolism and how the protagonists Aylmer and then Penny and Primrose are they view their thing, the birthmark or the thing, as a symbol. So you would do like one section or one point about Aylmer and then one point about Penny and Primrose, and then you move on to the next section of your argument, which would be describing and analyzing and contrasting the ways in which that these perceptions drive conflict. So you do, again, your point about Aylmer and Georgiana and the birthmark, and then move on to Penny and Primrose and the thing. And so you would, and if you see it kind of, it instead of doing one whole section, one whole block on the birthmark and then one whole block on the thing in the forest, it kind of integrates it together. It allows you to really stretch out that compare contrast a lot longer. But again, it does I think take a little bit more planning. Anyway, those are sort of the two methods for organizing. Both are equally good. Both have their benefits, and they're not mutually exclusive either. Like I think as you get writing and as you experiment and as you play around with organization, that you'll see that there can be a whole heck of a lot of crossover They're definitely not mutually exclusive. But if you got any questions, or if you would like to talk about other methods for organizing or developing your arguments, let me know, and I would be happy to chat with you. Thanks, everybody.